Hello, our truth warriors, and welcome back to the Atlantic Underground. Now, today's guest does not sugarcoat it. She always says it as it is. It's great to have my good friend Tajana, Truthseeker, with me. Hello, and welcome back. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for having me back. It's always an honor to be on the Atlantic Underground and talk to you and, bounce ideas off. And I always learn something new from you. So I'm definitely excited to be back.
No, it's always good. And we talk in between podcasts anyway, sharing stuff. So that's always good fun. Now, one thing I wanted to start off talking with is something that might be interconnected with something that we're going to be talking about later today with Michael Young. And that is something where all of a sudden the news in Canada has decided to put out that China has been executing Canadians. This is something that happened a while back, but it's very timely with the information that's come forward because Michael Yon spoke to me yesterday and he told me that he's had on good authority on a call from the White House that the US military are going to start making moves on Panama to remove obviously everything that China are putting in there, and it looks like this is gonna possibly cause eruptions and maybe lead us into war with China. Um, Canada doing that, saying about the executives being executed over in China. We don't know the full story. I know you were looking for it, and I've been trying to find more information on it as well. But it certainly looks like it's trying to sway public sentiment right now to have everybody hate China and support whatever moves forward. What are you seeing? What are you finding out? What whispers are we hearing on the underground movement?
Well, I first thing I heard about Panama was that BlackRock bought two ports of the Panama on each side. So it's almost as if they're owning the Panama Canal. And I thought that was a really weird move. And then right after that, we find out that China put tariffs on Canada. And no one's talking about that. They just said, oh, China put tariffs on Canada with this and this and this. And then it just went away. And everyone's still mad at the US. And so
Yeah.
I'm kind of wondering what is going on here. And then we get news that Canadians were executed in China, and yet still no one's talking about it. There's no outrage or anything on in Canada's terms of things. So you can tell that something's definitely brewing with China. And I could not find anything on the executions, which is super weird.
No.
Like not on any website, not even on the dark web, nowhere. It's almost as if the story just kind of popped up out of nowhere. So it's difficult to realize what is coming out of China because China is a huge propaganda machine, and there's so many assets in Canada that are intertwined within our government. So you don't really know if they're perpetuating on purpose the hatred of China within Canada, but it doesn't seem to be sticking with Canada as much as they'd like.
Yeah, and I believe obviously it comes into trade, it comes in control of ports, and also this ties in. Obviously, it seems like the peace deals are off the table with Israel striking Gaza again, but the US also saying that they want to attack Houthi rebels, which sounds like it's in relation to the original attacks from October 7th on Israel. But the reality of the situation is, and again, we're hearing through the networks of people that we know that the Houthi rebels have actually been trying to take the Suez Canal. Um, and this again is to free up these trade routes because when we consider that this trade route that China are trying to put in right throughout the world, this Belt and Road Initiative is going to be reliant upon them having these things. It looks like the US may be making a grab for these trade routes and these canals that allow the shipping lines to continue. But we're only going to find out as it progresses. But it's nice to be a little bit ahead of the press and kind of know what's going on. So we'll see what happens. It's there's not a lot we can do about it, but being forewarned at least allows us to strategically position ourselves should anything happen. And again, when I speak to Michael this afternoon, I'm going to find out what the position of Mexico and the other countries in between the US and Panama are going to be doing because again, this whole thing with trade tariffs, and I want to talk about that in a bit as well, kind of plays into it. So one thing I want to ask as well, I don't know whether you're seeing it where you are, whether there's enough people in the area that you're in and working. But I'm finding people's behavior is becoming more erratic lately. Now, I don't know whether this is because the fear porn's been cranked up or whether it's something changing around them, something changing within them, whether it's just the festering anger that sits in so many people manifesting itself in very strange ways. But are you seeing people acting slightly erratic lately?
Online I have. In
Yeah,
Texas, I really haven't. But then Texas again was very against the vaccine push as well. So I'm not seeing it in real, I should say real life. However, online, I am seeing a huge shift, even from the conservatives and people who were in the so-called conspiracy side of things, who didn't believe in the, jab or any of that. There is a very disconnection between people, and people are starting to not use logic and they're starting to use their emotions against each other. So I'm seeing a ramp up of anger amongst people online, especially in Canada, because I mean, the propaganda in Canada is very thick and always has been. I kind of knew it, from living on the inside, but I didn't realize just how bad it was until I left and
yeah,
just how much they've ramped it up over the last 5 years as well.
yeah.
And I'm seeing a lot of anger, specifically online from Canadians and liberals, and then even down here, Democrats with the Teslas and attacking Teslas and stuff. I'm happy that I'm in a
Sense.
very, very Republican area. I mean, I have not seen one Harris before I guess the election, I did not see one Harris sign in the area, and I'm talking about probably 100-mile radius.
Yeah.
It's all Trump, so it feels safe here, and people are very friendly and welcoming, and I think they're happier and calmer now that Trump's in office, because they're seeing progress to what they voted for. But I am seeing a lot of anger coming in from Canada and other countries that have been taken over by these globalists.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Now let's jump into one that's really going to kind of test your mind. And this at the moment, if people are going to call us conspiracy theories, we may as well theorize on where things may be going. Now, we talked with a gentleman called Jason Brashears about something that people know as the Phoenix event, which is a vapor canopy or the ether actually dropping down. He has managed to track this, and over many, many centuries, he said that there's been this repetitive cycle of this happening. It is like a natural reset, and he's got the date of 2040 in mind where this is happening. Now, I discovered something the other day to do with the 5G grids, and it appears that the way the 5G grids are going to work, and especially within the 15-minute cities, is that these 5G grids create almost the flower of life, which appears to be an artificial ether.
Wow.
And I was thinking that maybe the way they're going to move forward, because ever since we went through the COVID situation and everyone's on lockdown, except the engineers of 5G towers who were everywhere around the world, putting the infrastructure in and making this happen. But what it appears to be, it's creating an artificial ether, which makes me wonder is it unstoppable, this natural shift of energy that we're seeing, where it's going to start to elevate the energies around people as this vapor canopy or this ether starts dropping down towards Earth more. And is the way to contain people under control possibly the use of this artificial system using the 5G? What are your thoughts on the 5G system, and what are your thoughts on my absolutely off the wall crazy theory with this?
You know what's interesting is you said 2040, and there is a document online that was found on the dark web that was brought up by someone, and it said that the world would end, and this is a government apparently official document that was kind of leaked online, that the world would end in 2042. And then there's also a secret society called the Progeny of Jove that also thinks that in 2040, between 2050, some major event for resetting will happen. And they know this because it always happens in cycles. We're just not really known what will happen. And it's co almost correlating even to the Agenda 2050, which is the breakdown of Agenda 21 and 2030, and the eventual having people in zones, so the 15-minute cities that are being then eventually controlled by 5G towers. And so with the 5G towers, I have found very interesting, weird things. So it went up in 2020 when everybody was, locked up behind their houses with a virus.
Yeah.
And certain people are saying that the frequency that is emitted by 5G towers emulates the symptoms of COVID. So that's also interesting. And also 5G isn't as powerful as LTE was. So I don't understand the changing of the towers from, LTE to 5G. Then I also noticed in Grand Prairie, because people were complaining about 5G towers being slow, that if you drove through an area, you get a little signal on your phone that says 5G plus. So they've been upgrading the power of the 5G in certain areas that are least populated, because I was up north in the middle of nowhere. And so it's super interesting to see all of these inconsistencies and patterns happening. But I don't think it's a cuckoo conspiracy at all, because so far conspiracy theorists have so many points up on from, I guess, regular MSM news media. So I definitely think we're on to something.
Yeah. No, certainly is looking like that. No, as again, only time will tell. They have their agenda. They're going to continue pushing it forward. All we can do is inform people and hope that we get mass global pushback to stop it in time. It may be one of those things like the Indiana Jones movie where he reaches back and grabs his hat just before the door comes down. And even if it is last minute, as long as humanity has a reprieve at that point, I'm quite all right with that. But it's quite the battle that we've got ahead of us. But as long as we keep sharing the truths and talking and hoping that people just have that trigger moment of awakening, we can really hope that that's going to happen. Now, Obama and the lovely John Podesta and the beautiful Hillary Clinton were always the scumbags behind things like Comet Ping Pong and Pizzagate, as well as many other dark, sick, and twisted things that we've seen over the years. Um, but as our new world order, or their new world order, steps closer to its ultimate goal, how is the appointment of Mark Carney a piece of that jigsaw?
Oh, Mark Carney's such a huge piece of that jigsaw. Everything you see with Mark Carney involves Illuminati style, absolute degradation of society. Anywhere he is put, it seems like that place collapses. He also, what people don't understand, and what's really weird is I found this piece of information. I had it screenshot, and I was going to present it, and all of a sudden the screenshot disappeared off my phone, and also the website got shut down.
Weren't we
And it's
just talking about
I know. And
that?
it literally stated that he worked for the Russians after the Soviet Union collapsed, and he was
Yeah,
trying to help them with their finances, but he was also betting money against them and giving them, I guess, ideas of what to do to further fall the Soviet Union and Russia and soil them completely. So
yeah,
that was his first job. And then you see his pattern. He shows up into countries every time there's a major event or a downfall. So in Canada, when he was like the governor of Bank of Canada, that was right before the 2008 complete collapse.
yeah.
Um,
2008 till 2013, I think his appointment was there. Yeah,
yeah, and then he moves to England, where all of a sudden he's dealing with Brexit.
yeah.
And then,
2013 to 2020, I think he was in the Bank of England.
exactly. And then he comes back to Canada in 2020 just for COVID. And it seems like he's the Grim Reaper of any place that he comes into. So it's absolutely a scary signal when somebody of that caliber who hangs around with lords and, you know, in the UK and has ties to the Epsteins, to Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell, and so forth,
Yeah,
all of a sudden shows up back into your country and now is the prime minister, never to be elected, absolutely completely appointed, never has had any positions. And it's kind of frightening to see him liquidate also his companies from Canada to the US.
yeah. And I know in
So,
2020 as well, he was working for the United Nations. He's actually their climate change czar.
yep, yep.
Yeah,
So everything's everywhere Mark Carney seems to show up, something bad happens. And so when I realized that Mark Carney was in the background, that's when I was like, okay, the Grim Reaper is back in Canada, which means he's going to finish Canada off.
Yeah.
He probably didn't succeed the first time. He'll probably succeed this time. And the entire plan was for the Democrats to destabilize Canada so much to the point where Canadians will beg to become part of the United States.
Yeah.
And it seems like he's there to finish this job, or at least absolutely tank and rip Canada apart province-wise.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right because again, he's part of the World Economic Forum, so we know that he's part of the You Will Own Nothing and Be Happy party. And of course, the United Nations are far more sinister than anyone actually realizes. They've gone from being these, oh, aren't they wonderful peacekeepers, to really being the polar opposite, and being the antagonist for wars and causing things around the world. But he's a member of that. He's a member of the World Economic Forum. He's Bank of England trained. He's obviously the puppet for the central banks. Um, First of all, he's been put into a position unelected for this and allowed to just literally walk into an open door and be there, which is quite surprising. Um, Part of his promises seemed to be that he was going to remove this carbon tax, but being a climate change czar for the United Nations, that didn't kind of sit well with me and kind of, I thought that doesn't sound right. Is it right that I'm hearing that he's actually putting the carbon tax up higher?
Yeah, so what happened was he did a little theatrical show where he apparently signed a piece of information, which was not real because our government still shut down, stating that he will take away the consumer aspect of the carbon tax. And not even a week after he's done that, he's going to Europe and saying, well, Europe doesn't want to trade with us unless we have a carbon tax. But no one else that Europe trades with has a carbon tax but us. So for the first initial paper sign theatrics that he did was completely false and made up. There was no way he could have even signed anything because the it would have been the Governor General that of Canada that would have had to do that.
Mhm.
But the government still prorogued. So there's no way any of this would have been passed. So it was just theatrics. The mainstream news media picked it up to make him sound like a hero. And now all of a sudden they're hiding the fact that he's saying, oh, well, we have to keep the carbon tax and it's going to have to be higher because otherwise Europe doesn't want to trade with us.
Yeah.
And because they've already brainwashed Canadians into thinking that Americans are their enemy because of this tariff war thing, Canadians are now willing to pay more in carbon tax just to so-called stick it to the Americans, which makes no sense. They're just basically shooting themselves in the foot at this point. So it's interesting to see just how easily Canadians are fooled into this situation just because of a little bit of propaganda that was put out, when Trump got in.
Yeah.
So he's basically able to one day put on the carbon tax and then the next day he's going to increase it and people won't even, bat an eye about it.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Europe there, and we were talking about the war machine and what's happening a few minutes ago. Um, Again, another telltale sign. When I first heard about this, I kind of thought about why, and I understood it could have maybe been a financial thing. But have you heard about what Volkswagen are doing?
No, I have not.
Volkswagen never ever got involved with making weapons. Now, Volkswagen have just announced that they're going to start manufacturing weapons.
Wow,
Yeah,
really?
yeah. So
Wow.
right into the military industrial complex now. And that's a very telltale sign again of what we were discussing before about, the possibility now that the US are gonna go in and start something with China in Panama. Obviously, Canada promoting China killing their own citizens. Volkswagen in the heart of Europe are now starting to produce weapons, which they've never done in the history. I know they made vehicles for Germany during World War II, and obviously it was always Volkswagen itself. I think means the people's car or something like that. But yeah, there's very strategic movements going on at this moment in time. And when we start connecting the dots to it, it's looking not like this is just going to be a little war in one area. This is a big global thing. And now that the peace talks and Palestine and Israel, that seems to be off the table. It looks like it can spread all the way from China right the way through to Europe, possibly Canada, US, into the southern parts of South America as well. This really does look like it could escalate to a global war, which is quite concerning. But again, when these global wars happen, it always seems to be at a time when the finances of the world are in an absolute mess. And if anybody goes and looks at the world debt clock and looks at the current situation, pretty much every country in the world is absolutely insolvent. Their debt to GDP ratios are all above 100%, which means they're bankrupt.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, this seems to be something steered by the central banks to solve the problem. Whether this pushes into where I think it's going with the need for digital currency, the consolidation of countries for maybe a North American Union, and then maybe have three powerhouses around the world fighting each other. Could be the BRICS nation, could be the European Union, could be the North American Union. But the more they consolidate things, it seems like they're stepping a little bit closer towards this one world government that they have always desired, going back as far as I can remember, with speeches from presidents and prime ministers talking about the New World Order. What are your thoughts on this just being a stepping stone towards those goals?
Oh, 100% it has to be because 2020, a lot of people woke up. They took it way too far, way too soon, way too fast. It wasn't planned out really well. And so a lot of people woke up. And so now they're going back to the old playbook of creating wars. And it seems like everybody's stepping into whose side they're on. And usually it's two sides, right? You had like the Nazis in World War II, and then you had the good guys. But
Yeah,
right now you're seeing three different sides. You're seeing people who are siding with the United States. You're seeing Europe kind of go away from the United States and step back even from the UK. And then you're seeing China on its own with, I guess, Russia would definitely back China. But Russia also isn't really friends with
yeah,
China. They have a
no,
history there too, so you don't really know who would be on whose side.
yeah,
Because I know China and what they're trying to accomplish with their 1,000 year, redeeming themselves. And then you also see Russia has interests in certain border of China, because that was taken away before.
yeah,
So it almost seems like we've got four different teams now.
yeah,
And when you have that many teams, that means if anything implodes and everything kind of goes in the air, the only way to fix that is to have one world leader
yeah,
because there's way too much, branching off into its own. And I have heard that China will be like the top of, I guess, the world order by 2050. So I think right now either they're trying to abolish that and create a new world order, or China's trying to fulfill its 1,000 year plan of getting back to what was taken from them.
yeah. And it's very typical Hegelian dialectic. The problem is that it'll create world war. The reaction is that humanity don't want to be seeing people slaughtered around the world. And then the solution is this one world system. We can have world peace because if we have a one world government, it's got nobody to fight against anymore. And this is where unfortunately those who are asleep are going to welcome this in with open arms, thinking that it's the solution to world peace and world finance and hunger. And they really are going to promise people the world. And that unfortunately comes at the sacrifice of everyone's freedoms. And I don't think
Absolutely.
people really realize where this can head and what they'll be walking into. One thing I wanted to mention as well, there's a rumor going round, and I always like to look into things because, as we say here, believe nothing and question everything. But there was a thing going round that Mark Carney was actually Trudeau's cousin, because his Mark Carney's mum was a Kemper, and then obviously Justin Trudeau's mother was a Kemper as well because she married Freed Kemper, and his sister was supposed to be in the mix there within the relationship. So I contacted Kyle Kemper, who's a friend of
No way, did you?
yeah, I messaged Kyle and I said, Kyle, what's this?
That's
And
awesome.
Kyle come back and he goes, no, that's not true. So if anyone's watching this now saying, oh yeah, Mark Carney's Justin Trudeau's cousin, and his mother was the sister of Free Kemper and stuff like that. But when you go digging, it all pans out. At first, I kind of started looking into it, and I'm thinking, oh, this could be true. And I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to message Kyle, and Kyle comes
That's
back to me and goes,
awesome.
no, 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 it's not true. It's just bullshit. So, but we're going to dispel that myth. Now, speaking of rumors and things like that, um, there's a rumor going around that you may be possibly doing a documentary with Mickey Willis on oil. Um, wouldn't that be fantastic if that comes off?
That'd be awesome. Honestly, when you told me that, I was super excited. Just because I'm a nerd for oil and gas. A lot of people don't know that, but I used to watch the Doyan rig that's in Alaska right now getting built in Leduc.
Yeah.
So on the weekends when I wasn't working, I'd go to the outside fence of the company that was building the rig, and I would watch and see how they're building things. And then I heard when the move was happening, and you watch this in giant structure being moved from Leduc, Alberta, all the way to Alaska. I've been to Prudhoe Bay myself, not on any work missions or anything like that, but I wanted to see the slopes of Alaska and how things were built. And even the little hotel there felt like I was back in camp at a rig, working, except I was paying for it as a vacation, which is pretty sad. And then also my obsession with offshore rigs and all of that stuff. So I even told my husband, I'll do any kind of course. I don't even care what I do as long as I can get on an offshore rig just to see how things are done. But yeah, that would be pretty cool if it does end up happening. So
Yeah, yeah.
I will definitely have to get in touch with them and see what happens. So if
Yeah,
they
no,
want
it'd be great.
someone a little autistic on that side talking about oil in way too much of depth, I think it would be appreciated from my end.
Yeah, no, it'd be great. And the thing is, the whole documentary that he wants to put forward on this, we've seen so much negativity with people like Stop Oil, defacing paintings and things and doing
Oh yeah.
crazy sit-ins on roads and whatever. Again, there's been this push to demonize it, but the information that's coming forward from him in regards to it is how sustainable this is. And it shouldn't be as demonized as we're seeing this, the future energy and the possibilities of oil isn't as bad as things are being made out, especially in regards to the pollution side of things. So, it will be really interesting to see a positive spin on oil that nobody has tackled before because it's about time that's due from what I can see.
Oh, absolutely. And every time I've tried making a pro oil video, if it's not funny or me making fun of a politician, it usually gets taken down,
Yeah,
because I put in the positive aspects of oil and gas, and also that oil and gas is not just for running our vehicles. Oil
yeah,
and gas mainly goes into building our commodities. And so people don't understand that. Anything and everything you touch that is plastic that has been shipped to you is all thanks to oil and gas. And also, what people don't understand is that oil and gas naturally exists underground in our earth. It's a natural element. I'm not sure where this demonization of oil and gas came from, but I'm guessing it was propaganda to push the green initiative, which would not be able to sustain the amount of human beings we have on this planet without us all sacrificing and living like, it was the 1600s again.
yeah, yeah. And from somebody said a while ago, and I don't know whether there's any truth in this, you may know better, that it is actually a constantly renewable energy. It's constantly being made by the earth, and it's not something that is, everyone thinks it's from dinosaurs
Dinosaurs.
and
Yeah.
trees and things like that, but it's just something that the planet produces constantly. Have you looked into that any further yourself?
I have not looked into that, but I do know that we're not running out of oil. I mean, they said in the 70s we were running out of oil, and now we're very oil dependent. The population has almost tripled or doubled since the 70s, and we're still not running out of oil.
Yeah.
But I will definitely look into that. That's an interesting theory. But I
Yeah.
definitely don't think it was dinosaurs and trees. I
No.
know they say that it was dinosaurs because of Alberta, but what people don't understand is Quebec has a huge oil reserve. They just refuse to touch anything because of their Laurentian elites who are controlling Alberta's flow of money and oil.
Yeah.
So the deposits around the world don't kind of correlate with where they found dinosaur bones or dinosaur kind of remnants or evidence of dinosaurs. So
Yeah.
dinosaur theory is interesting, but it definitely isn't that.
Yeah. And it'd be like saying that we're going to run out of maple syrup because once we take it out the tree, it's not going to produce it anymore. It seems to me that oil on the planet could be very much a similar concept to the likes of tapping a tree to get maple syrup out of. And I know it's two completely different things, but it's still very Canadian.
Yeah, I love it. I'll definitely look into that. That's an interesting theory. I've never actually looked into that, but I knew oil would never run out. That's one thing I do know.
Yeah.
So, and people don't understand just how big the earth is and how many oil deposits we have, and that we've only tapped into it for the last century, and barely tapped into it. So, I think a lot of people have a very narrow view, especially when propaganda is added to that view. And so, of course, they'll go with what propaganda says instead of the people that actually work with oil and gas almost every day. I know a lot of people are like, why are you in Odessa and Midland? It's like there's nothing to do. And I'm like, to me, a sea of pump jacks is absolute beauty. Driving by a rig just open right there on the road. I don't know why, but it makes me happy. I know that that could be my stupid little interest that I have, but at the end of the day, I'd rather see pump jacks than be, middle of LA or somewhere.
Yeah, I know when we drove all the way through Texas, I was fascinated. We were driving through these flat lands, and I'm looking at all these machines going on in the middle of nowhere, and I thought it was so cool. Again, it's, just something that's testament to the ability of humanity to create and build, and it's an art form in its own right. But I'm sure there's probably plenty of liberal people out there screaming at the screen now telling us that we're destroying the planet, but there we go. So, speaking of things in the world that are possibly fake, um, is this tariff bullshit all part of the games? Not only to keep the masses angry, but also entertained, because when we consider pretty much every corporation in the world is owned by BlackRock, Vanguard, or State Street, and that the central banks are controlling everything in every country, financially, monetary wise, governments all around the world. The tariff thing is just a game, if that's the case, because it's just a show for people to see. Is this how you're looking at it yourself?
I'm seeing it from like few different perspectives. One, the tariffs will push a lot of Canadian companies to come into the United States, which
Yeah.
will make the United States a lot more powerful monetary wise, building jobs, building, industry within the United States. And then it will also weaken Canada's position in the sense of, are you really going to go with China or the United States?
Mhm.
Because China has infiltrated quite a bit of Canada. And so you can't really fight the war from outside, but if you can get companies to leave Canada, come into the United States, one, it would make the US a lot more powerful. It would weaken Canada's stance. And so then Canada would have to make a choice of whether, oh, are you going to align with the United States or will you align with China? Because I know a lot of Chinese companies have bought out the oil and gas industries in Alberta, and when you work for one of their companies that the quality of work will absolutely go down because they just don't understand the Alberta culture, how we kind of do everything. I came to one site on a well servicing rig or a pulling unit, and the consultant was from China, and he was there with a small little SUV. and all of us are with big lifted trucks, and it started snowing. And so I was asking him, like, how are you going to leave? Like, we have to go down a little goat trail. Like, how will you leave? Is this a four-wheel drive? I mean, his vehicle was a regular height. I don't know how he was going to get through the ruts. And I don't think he understood anything. So we just kept bowing to each other for about 5 minutes. I didn't want to be rude. He didn't want to be rude. I didn't realize he barely spoke English. So then the rig manager came over. He's like, he doesn't understand you. Like, we're gonna have to help him like leave. So we actually had to wait for him. And we were like, oh, are you gonna come and leave with us? And then we had to pull him out a few times, just because he got stuck. So it's definitely a different, completely different, world from, I don't know how they do things in China. I've never been to China. I've never looked at any rigs in China, but I don't think he was definitely ready for the Alberta Northern Wilderness or the muskeg and the muskeg freezing and stuff like that. So
Yeah,
there's definitely a huge cultural shift when companies get bought out by Chinese companies because they do implant their CEOs and their managers into that company.
yeah.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I always used to talk about and considered was the fact that the freedom movement itself and the people who have awoken could be ushering in the very thing that it never wanted. And the deception of that is the possibility that the governments, the prime ministers, the presidents, basically the shitbags around the world that have done all these bad things, the Fauci's, the whole thing that everyone is despising for what they've done. If somebody came along and started to expose what they'd done publicly, that people would listen to. So no longer are we the conspiracy theorists, and somebody there of power, position, and stature will start exposing it that garners public support. And yet, we need to get rid of Justin Trudeau. We need to get rid of Mark Carney because he's with Epstein and this and whatever it is. You know, all this exposure comes out, and it gains such a huge public drive to get behind it and see justice come for what these people have done. Once these people are removed, it creates a void. And that void then will be filled by the very thing that the ultimate goal always wanted, and that is to bring in possibly the likes of the Agenda 2030s, the Great Resets, and everything like that. You know, are we cheering on our own demise? And sometimes I wonder when we do expose things, whether we're actually adding fuel to the fire. So I'm going to say maybe the likes of the Epstein thing a couple of weeks back, was that just a purposeful distraction? Nothing come of it, the draining of the swamp. And what are your thoughts on Doge?
See, I actually find Doge very interesting because from a surface level, they seem like they're doing a great thing.
Yes.
But I'm also watching people, now liberals. This is the weird part. Liberals have come full circle because they're starting to make up conspiracies on their own. And I love listening to all the viewpoints, but they're saying that maybe he's trying to delete all of these things by showing us the corruption, by taking complete control so that eventually AI could take over and manage all the money for governments. And
Yes.
then if AI takes over, and we get the digital dollar, then everything will be AI monitored so that no one can kind of take advantage of, I guess, the system itself, of the money. So I've seen that on a few websites, and I thought that was an interesting conspiracy theory and definitely kind of could ring true. I don't really take any conspiracy out, even if it's being told by the liberal side of things. But you're definitely correct when you say that we really have to watch. I guess people are so used to dualistic things. So if they see this side, they're like, oh, all bad. And then they immediately think that this side immediately is all good. And so I keep telling people not to fall into any traps when the pendulum swings, because eventually the pendulum will swing all the way back and conservatives will come out looking like exactly what the liberals did in 2020.
Yeah.
So they will look like the little mustache dudes in World War II. And so it's really interesting that people cannot just stop in the middle, like, oh, we finally exposed this, but then they immediately trust the other side 100%. And then that side allows them to kind of perpetuate the plan even further. And I've always said if it's a chess game, that means there's two owners. And we're not one of the owners of that chess game. We're the pawns in the game and we're being played. And yes, for a certain while, while we're being played, it's going to seem like the chess owner whose side we're on is for us, but they also have a goal to dominate the other player. And so they always split us into two. But having to explain something so complex to people who are so emotionally charged, who don't want to listen to any logic or reason, is
Yeah.
almost impossible. And that's the one thing I've learned about, kind of having a little bit of fame online. And I'm not famous, but like a little bit of viral fame is that a lot of people do not understand hard, complex ideas because it's too difficult and too hard. So they feel like if they just side with the owner of one chess game, that person will do what's best for them when they don't realize that there are two owners and that they're the ones fighting for the one who will be on top, and we're the ones who will either help each side. And the only way we can kind of end the game is if we consciously become awake ourselves, work on ourselves, and then that way we can't be used as pawns.
Yeah.
But a
And
lot of people don't want to hear that.
no, no, because that emotional charging is, and I always look at it in the way that, we can look at the voting side of thing. And America's a perfect example to use because of the massive anger and emotions that get behind who, is supporting Donald Trump, who was supporting Biden. And I think, a lot of the people that were supporting Biden or Harris in regards to the lead up to the election probably didn't think that these were the best people for the job. But the hatred for Trump was so great that they would rather vote for what they see as the lesser of two evils, even though it's evil as it is. Now, people hold too much faith in politicians, in my eyes.
Absolutely.
And I understand that if people realize the whole thing is a rigged game and that voting doesn't matter because usually that's rigged as well, and that's come out over so many times and years. We know that the voting in Mexico has been meddled with. We know that the voting in the US, which means the voting in the UK and Europe and Canada, everywhere around the world, probably all falls under the same bracket. But the people hold on to politicians and the future of their country becoming better and putting faith into politicians because that is the last bit of freedom that anyone has because there's
Exactly.
nothing else really that they have control over other than putting that mark on a bit of paper. And because of
Exactly.
that, if people all of a sudden realize that the whole game is rigged and their votes didn't matter, and we can quote, if voting did matter, they wouldn't allow us to do it. But at the end
So
of the
true.
day, if people realized and woke up to the fact that it's all a rigged game, that removes the one last bastion of freedom that people can hold on to. Can you explain to people what the real purpose of politicians is?
The real purpose of politicians is to lead us to exactly where they want us to, with the illusion that we have the freedom of controlling it ourselves through voting for a person to represent us. So a lot of people don't understand that, and I also don't touch on that on my videos because I've noticed if I go into anything a little too heavy, a lot of people who are still asleep, who would like to believe in the system, who feel like they have control over the matter, start to lose their minds.
Yeah.
And they don't realize, like, yes, you do have, like, if we truly had control over voting, that means I could, run as prime minister tomorrow, and I wouldn't need about 500,000,
Yeah.
or $250,000 to start anything. And also, every single president, prime minister is always related to somebody, is part of like a secret society, is part of this group, or the World Economic Forum, or this and this and this. I think maybe 50 years ago or 70 years ago, it would have been slightly different, but I think we have been completely overtaken by these entities now politically, who are standing behind powers of corporations. So they first came and took the kings and lords of lands over into government so that we, had the illusion of being able to make decisions for ourselves, not realizing that these entities have taken over the kings and lords. And then eventually they came in and took over corporations, and now those corporations are taking over our governments.
Yeah.
However, everything is ushering into a certain direction to which the chess game. You've got this owner or this owner, but eventually we're leading to who will be in power for the next round of the chess games. And usually the chess games last quite a bit, a long time when it comes to the shadow government because they have to move slowly. But in recent times, it seems like they're running out of time and they've sped things up and they've gotten lazy and they've gotten how should I say this? They've almost gotten lazy with their antics. They used to put on much better antics. They used to hide their evidence much better, you know?
Yeah.
And you couldn't really piece together the truth. But now they don't even care about hiding anything. They're just like, these people are too stupid. Let's just put whatever we want out there, and they're gonna fall for it anyway. And they're getting away with it, with less effort, doing the exact same thing. So. It's super interesting to see how everything's unfolding. But if we had any power, we would not be allowed to vote. We just have the illusion of freedom.
Yeah. And that's it. And I always used to think, I always look back at history where, let's say it's, the literally the monarchy of any country where the kings and queens were in charge and the taxes went directly out, and people would go out to the villages to collect the taxes for the king or the queen or whatever. But all around the world in history, we've seen where they push too far and the people revolt and there's an overthrow. And, we saw it in Russia, we've seen it in Europe, in France, we've seen it in England. Do you think that government was created not only to manage the infrastructure of those countries, but also to act as a buffer to stop people turning up at the palaces with pitchforks?
I think so. I think that's one reason of it. And also the other reason, I think it's these same entities that have now taken over our governments, that took over monarchies, are the ones that cause disdain within the people to attack the monarchies so that they can come in and buy out the land. And now we're seeing that these government entities or banks own absolutely everything, and almost every monarch system in the world has been abolished, and they have also been put on the Epstein list for
Yeah,
blackmail so that they can be, blackmailed into standing in line with what the government and these corporations want from them. So whatever this entity is that has started to take over everything is also the one that's playing us right now with the government. And what people don't understand is they're so focused in on their lives that if they just zoomed out to the bigger picture, they could understand what is actually happening. But everyone's so worried about today and tomorrow and how they seem and what they have and bills they have to pay that it's almost hard to wake people up to like the bigger picture. So I try and wake people up in smaller pictures, but I don't think it's working. I think the sheeple will always be the sheeple, and if you gave them a louder enough voice, they would immediately go back to sleep, just because they don't want to rock the boat, right? So there's only like maybe what 10% of us who truly really know what's going on in the world, and we don't even really know the whole picture. We just
probably that
kind
much.
yeah, exactly. It's probably just like the tip of the iceberg, and then there's just so much more that even our brains couldn't handle it if we were given all the information, out there. But to be honest, if they just let all the information out there and it was absolutely absurd, I'd probably believe it over the reality that I'm seeing right now.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's scare some normies right now by telling them how the central bank control mechanism works. Go on, I'll let you do that.
Ooh, they basically own everything. Like if you look at BlackRock, Vanguard, and the banks and Chase, they own everything and they own each other in a loop. So you can't really know who owns everything. And then they have entities like the Vatican through the church of collecting money through the church. Then you have the City of London, not London, but the city
Yeah,
within London. That's the financial hub for everything. Then you have Switzerland, which is also a banking system. And you've got this nice little triad of where all of the money and power and control can be put in. And what people don't understand is that the central banks also have beliefs. If you're if you're an atheist, you will believe in the science, so you will believe it no matter what they say. It's
Yeah,
exactly how the Catholic Church works. No matter what is in front of you, you will believe what you believe. But what people don't understand is all those beliefs are exactly the same, just being presented into different forms of what people want their belief system to feel like, or what they're comfortable with. But eventually, all of those belief systems go back into the same funneling of control power up to the top, which are the central banks. And then, of course, you have different types of pyramid structures within secret societies, Freemasons, and all of that stuff. And it's so compartmentalized that even the people on the same level don't know what the people left to them or right of them are doing, let alone the people at the top. They do know what's going on at the bottom of their level. And so everything's so compartmentalized that if we don't put all of our information together and everything, we will never know the larger pictures. But the financial system has its tentacles in absolutely everything, and they will put in these players or pawns into certain systems with the way they want it to be guided, for the future of their goal, not our goals. So,
yeah. And I think that if people should be fully aware that every government around the world is fed money by the central bank to keep the operations running, and this is a loan that has to be paid back on the shoulders of every taxpayer. But that money is created out of thin air. It has no value apart from
exactly.
people
I don't
sitting.
think I don't think people understand that when you put $10 in a bank account, they times that by 10 or 100, depending on the bank, and that's how much that bank then allows the other banks, the world
Yeah,
banks, to loan them. So you're basically making money out of nothing. And if you have like 60,000 in savings or 600 in savings, that bank then has more power of lending power to lend to other people to enslave them even further. We
yeah,
basically have the same slave system that we've always had, but with the illusion of power because, hey, if I pay back my loan, I can be free. And then they start changing the rates and all of this stuff. Then they crash things and then you lose all your savings and then you have to start all over again. And for whatever reason, we've accepted this as completely normal, but it's a game so rigged in their favor, that it's almost impossible to, I guess, expose, because the system will eventually crash itself and then they will come in and build another system that's even more for their side than our side.
yeah.
So yeah,
Every
unfortunately.
time, yeah, every
Yep.
time there's this great wealth transfer. But people, if people don't believe what we're saying, go away and look up fractional reserve lending. And once you understand how fractional reserve lending works, you'll realize that the money's printed out of thin air and loaned to you with interest. It's a way of harnessing the energy of people's labor. And
Yes.
this is how the monetary system works. And speaking of the monetary system and central banks, you mentioned about the Vatican there, and we mentioned about the City of London. And of course, Washington, D.C. also has to come into effect with that as well, as principalities that are not under the rule of law of that country. In England, it would be the King of England now, but obviously it was the Queen when I first learned about it. Um, Royalty in England has to actually ask permission to enter the City of London. That's how powerful that square mile is. But you mentioned pyramids, which is a very good way to segue into where I was going with this. The City of London, the Vatican, and Washington, D.C. has one thing in it exactly the same. Do you know what that is?
No, I don't.
They went to Egypt, and when you consider that they could have just built something there, but no, they went to Egypt and they dismantled three Cleopatra's needles and shipped one to the Vatican, one to Washington, D.C., and one to the City of London and reassembled them. What kind of power must that harness, and what is the symbolism, I wonder, behind having? I mean, it's such an. Can you imagine how much of a massive feat it is to dismantle them in Egypt and bring them all the way to these central things? Is it a show of strength? Does that needle have some kind of power that it wields? I never really got to the bottom of it, but it's something worth looking into because there's no real explanation as to why they've done that, especially with them being principalities in their own right, and certainly this trifecta of power and control around the world. There's something more behind it, and I never really got to the bottom of what it was.
That is so interesting. I've never even heard of that, but I have studied Egyptian, like ancient Egyptian knowledge and how it correlates to secret societies and the powers that they hold, and that Egypt, and the cult of Egypt is actually behind all of this. The pharaohs, everything actually goes back to Egypt and then the Atlanteans, or the sea people that tried to fight them.
Yeah.
So I definitely know that there is a huge, huge connection between secret societies, Freemasons, and their beliefs back to Egyptian beliefs and gods. And if you look at the Egyptian religion, almost every single religion, Abrahamic religion, stems from them, and the name stems from them. And there's also a huge correlation with how planets in our systems align to the religions of Egypt. It's almost as if they were trying to tell us that the worlds and the planets hold different energies, and that when they're aligned in a certain way, those energies then get transferred to Earth, and then it can be harnessed either for good or for bad in certain ways, and that they're the only ones who hold that ancient knowledge. And so now I'm super interested into Cleopatra's Needle and how that. You're going to send me down a 5-day rabbit hole where I'm not going to end up sleeping
Oh,
right
you
now,
got
and
to
I
go
love it. See, this is why I
there.
love being on your podcast, because I just learned something new, and immediately my brain's like, the minute we get off of here, I'm going to immediately research all of this just to see where it takes me.
Well, I look forward to what you put out afterwards because I'm sure what you do find will come out in one of your wonderful videos where people get a lot of information. Now, is it a trap? Trickle down economics and socialism.
Oh, huge, huge trap. The entire system is a trap, but socialism is definitely a trap into getting people to, I guess, condition them to say, well, if I don't have, or if I have, then the other person needs to have or not have. And it doesn't matter with how much effort you put into your life versus how much that person puts into their life. We all need to be the same. And it's got that kumbaya hippie kind of psyops that they were pushing in the 70s and the 60s, which a lot of people don't realize that they were a psyops. And then now they've become like these vax pushers, just super weird how it all flipped into things. And I know even people are saying, oh, I had punk rock friends, and all of a sudden they're telling me we need to listen to the government. Do they even realize what punk rock music is? It's all anti-establishment and this.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it almost seems like these NPCs will just latch onto an image because they can't create their own image, or I guess their own personality. So
Yeah.
they just latch onto these groups. And then 2020 kind of revealed everybody for who they truly are. It didn't matter what kind of hair color they had, or piercings, or tattoos, punk rock, not punk rock, hippie, not hippie. It kind of exposed everyone's true reality of their masks. And so socialism and trickle down economics is basically a way of us being conditioned that, we always have to have an overlord. We cannot be trusted with our own thoughts and our own anything. In a sense, if you look around, people are so asleep that they can't be trusted with their own thoughts, which is sad. So you can kind of see how the elites are right in that sense of the way. Because imagine if you took the laws out. When the electricity goes down, chaos erupts. People aren't like, oh, okay, the electricity's down. I'm not going to go and loot anything. I'm not going to go and rob anybody. I'll just stay here and be calm and wait for it to come back up. That's not how most human brains work, because of the survival reptilian aspect of the brain, which goes into attack and survive instead of, hey, let's just logically think this through and see where it goes. So I can kind of see both sides, especially with the elites and what they're dealing with and why they're afraid of a mob like us that is, emotionally charged, that won't think logically in order to kind of, I guess, solve our own problems. And in history, we've always needed leaders. Like, we've always been tribal, and there's always been a leader, because people cannot seem to manage themselves or realize when they're wrong because of ego. And ego is the main one I think a lot of people need to really work on, because ego is what drives all of the evil in the world, including the evil that is happening in our own lives, because we can't see our own mistakes in order to fix them, become better people, because the ego won't allow it to see it. The ego wants us to think that we're the only perfect ones, and pointing fingers at others is the way to go. So,
Definitely. Now, I am seeing lots of people dropping dead from fast aggressive cancers. And I have to think back throughout my lifetime, family members or people that we knew growing up getting cancer. This was never the way it happened. They were sick for quite some time, and it was, always a hard battle for them to either get through it or unfortunately pass away with that cancer. This turbo cancer, aggressive cancer that we're seeing, seems to be a totally new phenomenon, and certainly in the numbers that we're seeing it happening. Is this very possibly something that could be linked to safe and effective things that people may have been given? Um, or is it just the time that we live in with so many toxins and poisons and food and glyphosates and things like that? Is it that? I mean, it's very difficult to determine what's causing this, but it certainly seems to be a massive spike from what I'm seeing. Are you seeing it from your side as well?
Oh, I'm seeing a huge spike. And I definitely think it has to do something with the safe and effective, not something, something huge, because mRNA is a blueprint for your DNA. And so if you inject mRNA into your body, and then I did read the FDA papers for the ingredients that are involved in the safe and effective, and unfortunately they are blanked out. So I don't know if they added CRISPR to it. I don't know if the nanolipids have a certain way of inserting themselves because cancers are a deletion in the gene in the mRNA or the gene. And the mRNA is a precursor to genetics.
Mhm.
And so, if there is a single deletion or a single mutation, that's why cancers used to take forever because one mutation would eventually cause another mutation. But if you insert a mutation already made into your cells, that's immediately what cancer is. And so I definitely think that there's a huge link in between what was given 4 years ago with what we're seeing right now. And the fact that mRNA can be made naturally in your body. So if it's in your body and it can't be released because it's a natural aspect of your body and your body can't see it as a foreign, thing, so it can't be flushed out, that means it's floating around in your body and being made continuously. So if it ends up embedding itself into any sort of other mRNA, and then gets turned into a protein, that protein can then cause havoc in multiple areas of cells.
Yeah. And I know I was talking the other day, I was actually talking with Mickey Willis about it the other day, and we were talking about the fact that it's most likely that the safe and effective and the problems that we're seeing currently is nothing more than a side effect where it's getting into people's body and causing problems. And we did postulate that there is probably a far bigger plan for what's been put into people because it never did what it was supposed to do, which tells me that it is a major component of possibly something moving forward into the realms of the likes of transhumanism, and maybe that this nanotechnology could be the base platform of that integrating or even taking away, the actual rights that people have of their bodies with it being patented, and all of a sudden it's no different to what we saw with Monsanto, and Monsanto have their genetically modified seeds, and then all of a sudden the seeds will end up in someone else's field, and they'll go and sue them for having their product in their field, and the whole thing's just a big joke to change things. But it does look like it's a very much larger plan, and people are very concerned, obviously, about shedding and spike proteins and this nanotechnology that's been seen. But I did actually see today, before we came on to talk, a video with Dr. Anna Malseer, is it? She's a blood doctor anyway. I think it's Anna Maria Malseer, something like that. Anyway, she said that what she's seeing and what she's finding is the use of this methylene blue going into people is actually going in, and it creates some kind of a needle, and this needle is able to attach on not only to the actual nanotechnology, but any kind of spike proteins as well as any kind of hydrogels within the body. And she's seeing it grabbing on and removing it. Now I'm well aware that methylene blue can go in and actually get into the human body and remove what they call free radicals, which allows people to have total cellular health back to the body. Have you looked into this anymore? Is it something that you've used yourself?
I haven't used it myself just yet. I actually had a listener to my videos ask me about going into methylene blue, and I was going to do that, but things ch kind of got busy and everything. But I can definitely see with the radicals, I mean, iodine is the exact same way. It is a large negative um, molecule that if you get iodine into yourself will actually take on the smaller positive charged molecules within your body, and positive charge molecules are radioactive in the sense of the way.
Yeah.
So I can see methylene blue doing the same thing because it's a foreign substance to your body, but can also attract certain things and then flush them out. And that's the only way that I think we could actually get rid of spike proteins is by having something encapsulated that is foreign to the body so that your body then realizes or has signals to flush it out. So that definitely does make sense in a scientific term, but I will definitely look into a lot more details of methylene blue and what is going on in that sense of the way.
Yeah, I seen a video the other day, and Robert F. Kennedy was on an aeroplane, and somebody was filming between the seats, and he takes a big squirt of methylene blue into his water and starts drinking it. So I'm guessing that guy knows what to do for health. So maybe that's a good sign that this is something that is possible to help people. And the funny thing is, what I learned is methylene blue is actually the first ever approved medicine. um, I don't know whether it was like an FDA approval or, but whatever the pharmaceutical approval was, it was the first one ever approved. I've got a feeling it was too effective, and they kind of pushed it out the way because then they wouldn't be able to sell all the other pharmaceutical products that they were producing. But time will tell. There seems to be a lot of positive information out there coming out about this. Maybe this might be the breakthrough for humanity to get off a lot of the things that they're on, and let the body, literally heal itself in the natural way that it should. But we'll see how that pans out. Keep in touch and let me know how you get on with your research on that. Now, if we're going to lay out the stages of where we think we're going to be going through under the establishment rule, what would that be in your vision moving forward? What do you think the next steps are going to be? We know what the ultimate goal probably is, which is mass human enslavement, but it's no longer what they used to call the totalitarian tiptoe, where the small steps are made. It's more great leaps and bounds now in a sprint to get to where they need to be. And I think it's exposing them a lot more because people are just kind of turning around and going, they're doing what? It's, even to the normal people out there that are programmed and brainwashed within the system, there's things that are spinning their head right now. What do you think the unfolding stages are as they move towards their ultimate goal? How are you seeing this unfold?
I think they're going to have another kind of 2020 event, but with a lot more information, to the point where they will flood the information system with so much information, whether true, false propaganda, complete lies, that it will completely destabilize everybody. And then they will have that one common enemy where we go into a world war or, people take sides. And then eventually they will tire us out to the point where we will all be begging for some kind of order out of the chaos. And in that order will be the digital IDs, the digital currencies, the 15-minute cities, allowing the planet, especially in the middle of the North America, from basically, I'd say there's an initiative called the Y2Y, and it's Yellowstone to Yukon, and they want to take that entire mid and move everybody out because it has the most watershed, the most lithium, the most oil and gas, mineral resources. And so everyone will start moving into these 15-minute cities because that's where all of the food and jobs and everything will be. And because people will be so exhausted from everything that they have put us through, they will voluntarily move. themselves
Yeah.
into these 15-minute prisons and these 15-minute cities, so that a whole generation will be born in them, not realizing that there was once freedom outside of the gates. And so if you look at the Brave New World, you will see what will happen. If you look at other things, you will have the outsiders, and they will be called savages, the ones that will be living the way we are living right now.
The
And then
wildlings.
wildlings, yeah. And then you will have those in cities that will have all of the luxuries, but they won't be able to move around, kind of like the line that is being built in Saudi Arabia, but they shrunk it. So it's not going to be, I don't know how many kilometers now. It's only, I think, maybe half a kilometer long. So they're having issues with that. So they're not really ready yet for the next stage. So right now we're just in the stage of being tired out and completely broken morally, to the point where we just give up and ask them to come in and help us.
Yeah. And in our tunnel here, this is like the Edgar friendly zone.
Yeah.
This is where people can come and live away from it. But you mentioned there about Yellowstone to Yukon.
hmm
Where's Yukon located?
Uh, oh, Yukon is in Canada.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Yellowstone is in the US, Yukon
Yeah,
is in Canada, and they've got plans to have this whole belt. Wouldn't that mean that they need Canada?
exactly. Exactly. I talked about the Y2Y almost 4 years ago, and I was like, it was an initiative that was put forward that the NDP, while they were in power in Alberta, wanted to get that through, and they wanted to close all of the parks along the way, and they wanted everybody who was in that area to be moved out eventually, either to have their farms taken away by, natural zoning rights, or maybe in natural disasters like all the fires that are exactly happening in that corridor every single year, where people now don't even want to buy homes in that area because you can't get insurance in that area. And there's a huge watershed in Toad, BC, which is in that Y2Y corridor, where the natural watershed, and I've been up there, I've drank like straight from the spring, and it is the best tasting water I've ever tasted in my entire life. Completely, straight from the ground. And so if they get a control over that, they get a control over not just natural water, but resources, lithium, and like, I mean, absolute gold for health soil. And so yeah, it's really interesting to see how far they're willing to go to push these agendas very slowly, to make it seem like it was either global warming that did it, or that we chose to get out of there. Like, it's interesting how they play these psychological games and how people can't see it, but it is what it is, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess the global warming would be certainly something that a climate czar for the UN could handle. Now, I think
Exactly.
I think the merger of the North American Union, Canada, and possibly Mexico with the US is already part of the plan, and
Oh
always
yeah.
has been part of the plan. I remember. Do you remember years ago they postulated something called the Amero?
Yeah, I definitely remember that. And I was reading up on that again when I was looking into Mark Carney and the Bush administration, and how Obama's pushed everything, and how the conspiracy theorists at the time were like, oh, it's going to be the Amero. But we're already one country under laws of, or financial laws, because we're all corporations right now. And we're all owned the same. We're just being given the illusion of borders and, I guess, pro-Canadian, pro this, but we're all already financially, legally under one entity. Now it's just trying to sell the idea to the common folk about, uniting all of us under one landmass. So
Definitely. So would you agree with this? Nothing in this world is by chance. It's all connected, and we all live a lie until we wake up.
100%. We are all one person experiencing the world from different perspectives. And if we put those perspectives together, that's when we will get the entire picture and what the universe is about. We are a species of amnesia. We have been put to sleep, and every time we get close to waking up, they either reset us, or they make something so big and they just put us back to sleep. And then we start all over again. And that is why during World War II, the little mustache people wanted to eliminate certain people, like that had memory in their DNA that is a little stronger than the memory of other DNA. And
Yeah.
so that is where that memory being stored in our genes kind of video came from. Because when I read that, I was like, whoa, is there any truth to this? And so then I started researching about ancestral memory within our DNA. And if you realize we're almost all connected in a sense of the way, whether it's from one person or the next, or even lines down the road,
Yeah.
everybody is connected and we have that memory holding within us, which is why the Bible says, like, the Lord is within you. And so I think if everybody kind of woke up to that, we could somehow connect all of our consciousness together into one to realize what is actually happening in the world.
Yeah. And it's funny that little people with mustaches also had a very deep interest and to the point of researching it to massive levels. I mean, most people haven't heard about the bell that they had that created frequency and resonance, but there was also the huge program called the Vril. And have you looked into that as well?
Yeah, I made a video, it got taken down on TikTok, but it's still on my Facebook and my Instagram. I think it was on X, and it was like the Real Virus Society and how a certain virus can, if injected into the eye, can control a human being. And that virus actually came from another species that is on Earth who is keeping us asleep. So that's all I will say. So your video doesn't get taken down. So.
Wouldn't be the first time, and I'm not
Yeah,
bothered
fair
anyway.
enough.
But you talk about the ability to control people through genetics, and we mentioned before about the safe and effective and changing genetics within things. Do you think there's a far more sinister purpose to the big push that we've seen literally over the past decade with the likes of 123 and Me and Ancestry.com and things like that, where the gathering of people's genetics and under the guise of, oh, we'll tell you whether you're part Viking or whatever, whether you've got African blood in you, Italian, whatever, these ancestry things, do you think they have been a gimmick but purposeful in gathering the information they need for genetics of humans from all around the world?
100%. No one can convince me otherwise. There's been genetic studies in the 70s of certain areas in the world. One of those areas was Africa, which is why they released the lab-made HIV virus in there, which is also an mRNA based virus that injects yourselves into your own DNA and then produces the virus itself to eventually then take over. And they've noticed that the African DNA is the strongest. So there are people who have had HIV, and HIV hasn't even been around that long. I mean, it was like an epidemic in the 80s, and there's already people who have now integrated the HIV virus into their own DNA and evolved so that it does not actually affect them and it will not cause things to go any further from HIV to AIDS. And so with that study, then they realized that if they could study a lot of more people, they could get a better understanding of whose genetic DNA is stronger and who's more likely to be mutated, depending on which part of the world that they live in. And so I think the Ancestry.com and all of that then started off with how can we get people to volunteer their DNA to us, regularly. And how fun is it when you go on TikTok and you do a little video, oh, look, I'm like 5% this, 10% that blah, blah, and people see it as a funny way. And then people try doing it. And then they realize that if twins were to give their own DNA, they would get back completely different things. So all of a sudden, now that's fake. So what are they actually using this genetic for? And why is it being collected? And people don't understand that these are private corporations doing this. These aren't governments. These are private corporations doing this. And so, of course, they can't just go to a hospital and start stealing people's bodily fluids, for their studies. And it has to be a voluntary base. And if you make it fun and exciting, people will actually volunteer their own genetic code to it. I think that's exactly the same thing that was with the test during 2020.
Yeah, very possible as well. Great time to wrap this up. As always, we go off in all kinds of different directions, and hopefully, we charge the minds of people to give that little creative spark of thought to maybe looking in the directions that they may not. Is there anything that you want to leave us with today? Is there anything that you're working on or looking into that you think is going to be important for people to hear before we go?
Oh, I'm looking into so many things right now all at once, and I honestly have no idea what will be important, but I always let people know that if they really want change in the world, the change has to come within.
Yeah,
And if people can really look into themselves, self-reflect, and if you know yourself inside out, you can actually start to read people like a book.
yeah,
People are very habitual, but if you know yourself inside out and you know all your shadow little ticks and the dark side of yourself, not just the good side, that's when you will start to understand fully how humans operate and how humanity has been going. And if people can become comfortable with their shadow side and to make themselves better human beings, that's the only way we're going to beat the matrix in the end of the game. There's no amount of governments that we can put in. There's no anything. It all eventually comes from within, and a change from within has to start with each one of us in order to make this world a better place. So that's what I always leave people as is really look within, get rid of that ego, have a bit of a more open mind, open heart towards other people, study yourself because that will kind of reveal to you what other people are about and then maybe help others along the way.
that's fantastic. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure speaking to you. And as we always say here at the Atlantic Underground podcast, believe nothing and question everything. And we look forward to speaking to you again in the near future. And hopefully, we'll get over the things that we think are coming and we'll have a lot more positive and better news to enlighten people with. But until then, we'll just keep exposing what we do. Thank you again for coming
Absolutely.
on, and I look forward to catching up soon.
Thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure. Thank you and hope you have a great day.
We will. Thank you.